Well, hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to Kingston WritersFest. My name is Ara McCauley, and I'm pleased to present The Big Idea, the End of Life as We Know It. Thank you for joining us. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we generate this online presentation is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. We gratefully acknowledge these Indigenous nations for their historical and ongoing guardianship of this land. We agree to peaceably share in responsibility for stewardship of this land, its waters, and all of its biodiversity. All those who come to live and work here are responsible for honoring these relationships in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. We're grateful to those organizations and individuals who support the festival. Kingston WritersFest would especially like to thank our media sponsor, The Walrus Magazine, Marianne Higgs, author patron of Darrell Bricker, Chez Piggy Restaurant, author patrons of Catherine Bush, David O'Toole and Julie Leclerc, author patrons of Tessa McWatt, Virginia Gordon and Lynne Kennedy, author patrons of Jeff Rubin, and Ann-Maureen and Peter Owens, author patrons of Carol Off. We'd also like to thank the Canada Council, GG Books, Heritage Canada, Ontario Arts Council, the City of Kingston, and the Kingston Arts Council. Also a special thank you to Tourism Kingston for their marketing support. Thank you too to all of those who have donated to the festival. As a bit of housekeeping, a reminder to complete our online survey for a chance to win a pass to next year's festival or a festival book package. And you can see details on our website. This event has been pre-recorded, but we welcome your comments and exchange of ideas on our Facebook page. I'll introduce Carol Off in just a moment, but first, Julie Leclerc, Board Chair of Kingston WritersFest, will say a few words. Julie?
Hi. Hello, everyone. I'm Julie Leclerc. I'm the chair of the board of directors of Kingston WritersFest. I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to make an important announcement, and then I'll let you go back to the big idea. It is with a mix of sadness and gratitude that the board of directors announces Barbara Bell's departure as artistic director of the Kingston WritersFest at the end of this year in December 2020. Barbara has been with the festival since its infancy, since 2009, and has worn many hats over the years: event planner, festival administrator, producer, associate director, general wrangler, you name it. She has touched every aspect of the festival, has left her indelible mark everywhere. She has played an integral part in Kingston WritersFest development from a small local festival to one that is highly regarded across the country. And Barbara became artistic director in 2014, which has allowed her creativity to shine. She introduced many new events, new collaborations, created innovative programming year after year. She's an inspiring and generous leader, encouraging and supportive, promoting a productive and respectful workplace. She's played an important role in the evolution and success of the organization and has helped make it the inspiring, engaging, and diverse festival it has become. I also want to acknowledge Barbara's contribution to Kingston's broader arts community. Over the years, she's found time to be chair of the City of Kingston Arts Advisory Committee. She sat on the inaugural Mayor's Arts Awards nominations working group. She sat on the Kingston Arts Council Arts Advocacy Committee and the Kingston Writers Refugee Committee. Again, we cannot thank Barbara enough for the dedication, passion, generosity, and enthusiasm she has given Kingston WritersFest over the past 12 years. It's been a pleasure to work with Barbara. She will be greatly missed, not only by her colleagues and the board, but also by the entire festival community she has so well served. While we will miss her tremendously, we wish her the best of luck with a new business that she will launch in January. We look forward to following the success of the next phase of Barbara's career, and we offer our sincere thanks to all of you for your ongoing support as Kingston WritersFest enters a new exciting chapter. And an announcement regarding a new artistic director will come in the next few weeks. Thank you. Have a great evening.
Thank you very much, Julie. And with that announcement, we're on to the main event. So I will introduce Carol. Carol is a longtime moderator of Kingston Writers Fest, The Big Idea. She's the co-host of CBC Radio's As It Happens, a Canadian interview show that airs on CBC Radio 1 in Canada and various public radio stations in the United States through Public Radio International, live weekdays at 6:30 p.m., 7 p.m. in Newfoundland. Carol also has longtime involvement with the Canadian Journalists for Free Expression and has won numerous awards for her media work, including a Gemini and 2 gold medals from the New York Festival of Television. A distinguished career in journalism has taken her around the globe to cover major events, and she's the author of numerous books, most recently All We Leave Behind, a reporter's journey into the lives of others, which was a finalist for the Shaughnessy Cohen Prize for Political Writing, the Governor General's Literary Award for Nonfiction, and the Hillary Weston Writers Trust Prize for Nonfiction, and which won the British Columbia National Award for Canadian Nonfiction. Please welcome Carol Off.
Hello and welcome to The Big Idea. Am I on screen?
You are on screen.
All right, good. That's a good start. I want to just first of all welcome everybody to this evening. As you may know or not know, we are pre-recording this to accommodate everybody. And so I just wanted to say one thing about that. First of all, is that there are a lot of events going on right now that we may actually talk about and the ongoing events. And so if we don't seem updated on these things, then you'll understand we did this a few days earlier. I want to say I'm just so surprised to hear the announcement from Julie about Barbara Bell. She has been absolutely an anchor for this festival for these past several years and for many years before she was director. And I think it's a great loss to the festival, but I'm sure you're going to find someone terrific to take her place. I will, and many of us will truly miss her participation. We planned this big idea months and months ago, and we could not have, I think, even imagined the backdrop would be the one we now have, which is really just absolutely extraordinary moment in history. We have, I mean, do I need to tell you, unless you've been living on Mars recently, we have a pandemic, an uncontrollable at this point virus is killing thousands of people every day. We have tremendous economic upheaval because of that some say may come to defy even the Great Depression. We have, I don't think the word protest quite sums it up, does it? I mean, the upheaval, a revolution dealing with racial injustice in this country, in the United States, that's showing these huge cleavages in our society. And in recent days and weeks, perhaps one of the biggest villains that, and I say, I think the biggest villain because all of these areas will be affected by it, which is that the clear and present danger of climate change and what it's doing to many parts of the country, of the United States and of the world right now. And so all of that we're dealing with. And I guess, you know, besides that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play? And so we are going to try and deal with a lot of that. Only one of these books actually speaks directly to the pandemic we're now dealing with. And that's only because of how it was, how and when it was published. But they all speak to the times in which we live. And all of these authors have insights into the challenges of where we are right now, which are profound, and they all have insights into where leadership should be taking us, what kind of leadership we need to take us out of this, and who should lead and where they should lead us to. I'm going to introduce the 4 authors as a group right now quite briefly, and then I will longly introduce them just after that. I want to first of all tell you that Catherine Bush is with us. Hello, Catherine. Her novel that we're going to talk about, her latest novel, here's visual aid, Blaze Island. Can anyone see this? Blaze Island. This is a advanced reading copy, so not as pretty as it's going to be. It's still a beautiful picture. It shows us, it's a novel that shows us how people might respond in a not so distant future that climate change has brought us to. We have the nonfiction from Jeff Rubin. Here it is, and it may match the T-shirt he's going to see. He's wearing. Is that backwards when you see that? The Expendables. How the Middle Class Got Screwed by Globalization. It's a very vague title. I'm sure we don't have any idea what that's about. Then we have Tessa McWatt and her book, Visual Aid again, beautiful book. Tessa's book is Shame on Me, An Anatomy of Race and Belonging. And Darrell Bricker's book, Next. I like to, and that's Next is Where to Live, What to Buy, and Who Will Lead Canada's Future. So those are the 4 books and the 4 people we'll be talking to. And I'll say that I don't need to tell you that's an incredibly wide range of subjects, but the problem always with this panel, the big idea, and with any panel of this kind, is that we lose the individual books. We lose what they are trying to say in those books and the importance of these works. And all of these works are truly significant and important. So I don't want to lose that. So what I will do, and people who have seen the Big Ideas panel before know this is how I've conducted it, that I will do a short interview with each of the authors about just their books. And then we'll have a larger discussion that will bring everybody in, and which is going to be challenging. I had to invoke what Samuel Johnson said about metaphysics, because it seems like it's an act of metaphysics that will do this, that he described metaphysical poetry as the heterogeneous ideas yoked together by violence. And I think that we're going to have to have a metaphysical part of this program, and so stay tuned for that. I want to start, first of all, talking to Catherine Bush about her beautiful novel, Blaze Island. And this is her 5th novel. I think it stands to be her most successful, and not least because of its descriptions of a Newfoundland island in the midst of climate change and the effects of it and how people are dealing with that. Her past novels include Accusation, which was a Now Magazine best book and an Amazon best book. Rules of Engagement, which is my personal favorite, a national bestseller, a Globe and Mail Best Book of the Year, a New York Times, a New York Times notable. Minus Time, her first novel, which won the City of Toronto Book Award, and Claire's Head, a Globe Best Book of the Year. And she is just outside Kingston someplace. Hello, Catherine.
Hello, Carol. Yes, here from Eastern Ontario countryside.
Great to see you. It looks like the beautiful landscape behind you. I can see the countryside is right there. There's a picture of maybe Newfoundland.
Yes, that's right. It's actually by an artist who was in the same residency program as I was in Tilting on the far reaches of Fogo Island, which Blaze Island fictionalizes in the novel.
The picture really captures it. I mean,
well, it's a house at sea in which the sea is turbulent, as you know, seas and life are turbulent these days.
I was reading Blaze Island during Hurricane Laura. And so I had this feeling of upheaval, but worse than that, or more important than that, that my husband at the time was traveling from St. Lawrence on the Burn Peninsula in a boat, in his boat, which is kind of a Cape Breton fishing boat style, with a couple of his boy pals, and they were going along the coast back to Cape Breton. And your descriptions of weather, of wind, were so terrifying to me that if I wasn't already losing sleep, I would definitely have lost it. How did you research this novel?
Oh, well, I live with a lot of wind. I spent a lot of time on Fogo Island, whereas one of the locals said to me, wind determines everything. And, you know, I have lived through one really bad hurricane, which was on Cape Cod many years ago, but, you know, enough to rip the fronts off all the houses, except mine, which was, you know, mine was the first protected by the breakwater. So I had that internalized sense of what it is like to live in a hurricane. I depended on a lot of people's stories. So I spent a lot of time returning to Fogo Island over 8 years. And in my novel, a climate scientist and his daughter, his career is destroyed by climate change deniers. So he flees to the island, hoping to create this bubbled life, safe life, protected life for his young daughter. And he wants her to lives self-sufficiently in an off-grid house, and she embraces this until a stranger arrives in the midst of this huge hurricane and compels her to start asking questions about her father's mysterious weather experiments. And he has been lured to think about the possibilities of climate engineering, which is large-scale tech interventions into the planet's atmosphere to try and combat global heating. And, you know, it's a very contentious range of research. And he uses this ultimately to be a way of a plot of retribution against his enemies, which include a key climate change denier and a venture capitalist. But there was research obviously into climate engineering, both the politics and the science of different kinds of proposals, from the sort of jerry-rigged small scale things a bunch of physicists were trying to create something in garages in California to, you know, big university funded programs. And then a lot of lived research, being on Fogo Island over the course of 8 years and asking people for stories about wind, about climate, what they observed changing over that time. And living in that place over time myself, encountering icebergs, which I never had before, 10,000-year-old ice melting in front of your eyes. I mean, it's a really awesome, disturbing, and yet incredibly beautiful experience. I mean, they feel practically alive.
Anna, you worked on it for a number of years because of the travel, because of being on Fogo Island, because of what you wanted to know about the science, and you didn't want that science to be thin in this book, and it's not. It's, I guess, a work of speculative fiction. That's what you set out to have. But my God, could you have believed that events would have caught up with you so quickly? That you describe in the novel just this idea that we haven't seen the full effects of these kinds of Caribbean hurricanes reaching so far north, and yet that's changed in the novel, and it certainly is changing now for people who live there. Could you have imagined that you would be actually in the midst of the very thing you're writing about?
Yes, because I actually think we've been in the midst of this for years. I mean, it is intensifying, but there have been increasing hurricanes, you know, over the course of the last 10 years. And I always imagine the book as being in a slightly alternate present, set right around now. And, you know, what happens to my climate scientist, the way he loses his job, is very much based on what happened to actual scientists in in 2009, around then. And so, you know, there are wildfires in the background of the novel, as there are currently incredible wildfires on the West Coast of North America. And, you know, this huge last Arctic ice shelf, you know, sort of fell into the sea this summer. So in a sense, it was a challenge to keep abreast of everything that was going on. But you know, the novel tries to create the aura of a tale of being slightly fantastical at the same time as it's really pressed up against reality. And, you know, one of the challenges for me was how to write a novel that dramatizes the climate crisis without it becoming despairing or falling into cliche, the same kind of stories that we've all heard before.
And the fantastical aspect of it, of course, because it so clearly mirrors or compares with Shakespeare's The Tempest, and with the characters in it, Miranda, this beautiful young woman who is on this island, and the descriptions of it, which are, of course, Newfoundland is very, very mystical, magical to begin with, so you capture that. But you have an epilogue to it, which I find really interesting, that it's obviously a change of voice, so I'm guessing it's you speaking, because it's a third person for the rest of the novel. And that epilogue concludes with this really very important line that change is clear after it happens. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think it's very hard to see change when we're in the midst of it. I mean, the pandemic is another example. I mean, we're so reactive in those first moments, and it's only in retrospect that we can really see and understand what's happened to us, which is where the importance of storytelling comes in. And Miranda, one of my central characters, is grappling both with slow change, as we all are when it comes to the climate crisis, these small incremental changes that all of a sudden reach a tipping point and become extreme, and also sudden catastrophic change, you know, for her when a stranger arrives, when this hurricane cuts the island off. But in a sense, she's very much a young every woman. And her grappling with change is our dilemma at this moment. And we all live on a planetary island too. And I think how we confront change is going to be crucial to how we figure out a path going forward.
Well, I think probably the more profound line you gave to your character, Alan Wells, who says, "We're in deep shit."
Yes, well, that's the polite way, actually, of saying what the climatologist Jason Box said, and he was, quite notorious for saying, "Well, we're effed," is what he said, and yeah, and then there's a funny, actually, article in Vice in which he's quoted, in which the journalist says he doesn't understand why climate scientists don't swear more, which is a line I really loved.
All right, great novel. Thank you, Catherine. Jeff Rubin, hello.
Hi.
There you are in your room someplace. That's messy. That is a messy room, Jeff. Can I tell you that?
I'm a messy guy.
You're also an economist. I'm going to give you a little brief introduction. You are the author of numerous provocative books. Why Your World's About to Get a Whole Lot Smaller, The Carbon Bubble. I think I can see one of those copies behind you. The End of Growth. And now this book, The Expendables, How the Middle Class Got Screwed by Globalization. Jeff is the former chief economist at CIBC World Markets. He is a senior fellow at the Center for International Governance Innovation, which is based in Waterloo. Was. Oh, where is it now?
No, I was.
There, okay. All right, well, welcome, Jeff.
Good to be with you.
How much thinking actually goes on in a think tank?
They wouldn't be proud of this book, and probably a little embarrassed that I was a senior fellow in the area of trade, because like most global think tanks, they very much believe in the World Trade Organization. They very much believe in globalization. They very much believe in basically everything that I diss in this book. So they probably wouldn't want to seek an affiliation.
It's always, I guess some idea that someone's not read a book if they start with the first page of a question or the title of the book. But I'm actually going to go beyond that. I have read the book, but I'm going to start like before the first page of the book, and that's with your dedication, which is to all those left behind.
There are many. Unfortunately, most of those people don't buy books, but what can you do? There are many. And pardon me?
Who are you dedicating the book to?
Well, I'm dedicating it to what used to be known as middle-class households, and they're becoming a rarer and rarer breed. They're, for the first time, no longer the majority of households in countries like the United States. Not only have they shrunk as a percentage of the population, but their economic role has changed. Back in the 1980s, they accounted for 60% of all household spending. Today, they account for barely 40%. And ironically, that's the same percentage as the top 5% of US households account for. And Canada, Australia, Germany, UK, the story would not be measurably different.
Yours is the only book that reflects on the pandemic, because I think you were able to inject some of that reality into it because of your publication date. And so it's useful to have that as a wrap around these ideas. And I wonder, many have remarked that the pandemic has cracked open so many things, revealed so many truths that people have been grappling with or trying to project for some time. I'm wondering what the pandemic has revealed to us about
it's a game changer.
Globalization.
Up until the pandemic, people believed that not only was globalization beneficial, but maybe more fundamentally inevitable. And to try to resist it would be like a Luddite trying to resist technological change in the early days of the Industrial Revolution. And everything that we've come to believe about global supply chains, comparative advantage, just in time, that's all been shown to be quite fraudulent. Because when you desperately needed those global supply chains to work, when you desperately needed an N95 mask or a ventilator, guess what? They didn't work. And the only way that you were going to assure your population of those necessities is if you hold those global supply chains out of low-cost countries like China and started producing them yourself. And that's just what, Trump ordered GM and Ford to do. Just like Ford made bombers during World War II, GM closed down auto plants in Michigan and started making N95 masks and ventilators. And 3M and Canadian company Medicom, sure, they had plants in Shanghai making masks, but there was some official from the Chinese government who commandeered those plants and decided where those masks were going to be sent and not sent, and North America wasn't where they were going to be sent.
So how does Donald Trump figure into your narrative?
Pretty much. I'm a fan. No, and I don't have to apologize for that. I think we need more populists. I think we need populists right here in Canada. But as I said at the beginning of my book, Bernie Sanders had exactly the same trade policy as Donald Trump. And had Sanders won the election, which was denied to him by the elite of the Democratic Party, we'd still have the same trade war with China, and NAFTA would have been renegotiated. What I think has changed is that whereas pre the pandemic, the kind of arguments that I'm making was only made on the populist right, Donald Trump, or the populist left, Bernie Sanders, I think after the pandemic, it's going mainstream. And maybe the irony here is that all past pandemics, going back to the bubonic plague, to the Spanish flu, raised wages in their wake. And there hasn't been a real wage gain for North American workers since 1975. Ironically, I think COVID-19 will result in the same kind of impact on wages, not because of the physical decimation of the labor force, like what happened with the bubonic plague, that there were less peasants to work in the field, less workers to work in factories, and hence the price of labor rose. But by disrupting global supply chains, by bringing back jobs that we thought were gone forever, by making things here and paying local wages to produce those things, I think for the first time in decades, the expendables might actually be looking forward to a wage increase.
What has Donald Trump delivered for the expendables?
I think what he's delivered for the expendables is the first increase in manufacturing employment in decades, increases in employment in industries like steel and aluminum that had not seen increases in decades. And the irony here is that, Donald Trump has betrayed the interests of his class. He's a billionaire. Apple wants to produce all of their iPhones in China. American industry wants to outsource jobs because it increases profits. That's why profits are at a record high. That's because we had a bull run in the stock market. But the counterpart of that is that wages haven't grown in 50 years and the manufacturing sector has been hollowed out. So I salute him, but I'd point out that what he was espousing was exactly the same policies as Bernie Sanders was. And I think we need to hear those voices either on the left or on the right here in Canada.
But I guess, whatever Donald Trump may have promised to those expendables, it's questionable what he's actually delivered. You mentioned the manufacturing jobs. Much of it, of course, eroded because of what's happening with the economy right now. But do you see that returning? Do you actually see him in promising? We haven't even heard a platform from him in this election.
You see, Carol, what folks like you have to face is what happens when people you despise speak the truth. Do we ignore the truth because we despise the messenger? Or do we ignore the messenger and accept the truth? That's something that you'll have to figure out. I think I already have.
Who is it that I'm despising?
I'm saying because you don't like Donald Trump, because he offends you in so many fronts, you're very reluctant to acknowledge that what he's saying about the World Trade Organization, what he's saying about globalization is spot on. And the people who have sold out the middle class are people like Joe Biden, Barack Obama, Chrystia Freeland, Justin Trudeau. That doesn't fit the narrative that you like to tell. So hence, it's challenging. I think my book offers an alternative perspective than the narrative they hear in the media.
All right. I didn't know that you had such a large understanding of who I am, Jeff, but I'm not sure that you really understand me, but that's fine. That is your view. I'm going to, as we said, we have 5 minutes for each person, 5 to 7 minutes. So I'm going to talk to Tessa McWatt now. Thank you. Tessa, welcome, Tessa, from London.
Thank you. Thanks, Carol. Yeah.
Tessa is, well, she is many things. She is a novelist, a librettist, a teacher, a writer of children's books, a screenwriter. Her work's been nominated for City of Toronto Book Awards, the Governor General's Award, the O.C.M. Bocas Prize. She's a professor of creative writing at the University of East Anglia, and she is a force to be reckoned with. Tessa was born in Guyana, grew up in Canada, and now lives in London, UK. And her memoir, which we'll be talking about, is Shame on Me, An Anatomy of Race and Belonging. Welcome, Tessa.
Thank you. Thanks.
I'll put to you the same question I asked Catherine, which was that, could you have imagined that your book would prove to be so prescient, that we are in the midst of this question that so many are asking about race and belonging right now, that many people are asking for the first time for themselves? Did you think that you would actually be right in the zeitgeist when you came out with this book?
Well, no, not really. As Catherine said, this is something that's been around for centuries. And so it's not a new topic, and the Black Lives Matter movement is not a new movement. There have been Black people, innocent Black people, killed by policemen over decades, over centuries, but over decades in our current understanding, in the current news cycle. And so not really, but for me, things became quite crucial when in 2016, and this is going to rub Jeff the wrong way, but when Donald Trump was elected and when Brexit happened here in the UK, when a certain veneer was torn off of what liberal thinking does in the West, and what liberal thinking does is say that we're in a post-racial society where race doesn't matter, but it actually, it became clear that there was a greater divide than we had, I think, liberals were acknowledging. So it became important for me to address that because I'm multiracial, because there's no sort of black or white for me. It became important for me to mediate that discussion for myself, for my family, for my nieces and nephews, so that they would understand their place in all of this.
Canadians know this question. Everyone's been asked it. Who are you? Where are you from? Even if an unusual name like Off, you get asked about that. But people of color are more frequently asked, where are you from? Because you're not from here. That's, I guess, the implication. Your story actually begins in Toronto, in Willowdale, in the late 1960s. You're not even asked, who are you? You're asked, what are you? Just tell us that story, if you would.
So I was in grade 3, and we were reading a book together as a class, and a word came up, and the word was Negro. So and this is in Willowdale at the time, which was predominantly white. Our family was sort of I was the one person of color in the classroom. Our family was the sort of one brown family on the street. And so the teacher said, does anybody know what that word means? Does anybody know what Negro means? And all of us sort of sat around not knowing, me included, because that's not a word that came up in my family. I knew what Black was. I knew where we were from, but that wasn't the word. So Negro was a word that was like a scientific word, a species kind of word that was asked what we knew about it. And I just felt like I couldn't answer. And then someone in the class, a boy in the class, turned around and said, yes, Tessa. And the teacher sort of, everybody turned to me, which is not great for a shy kid in class. But everybody turned to me, and the teacher said, oh, no, not Tessa, she's something else. And I'm there going, oh, really? You know, and then she said, what are you, Tessa? And I couldn't answer. And she gave me hints, you know, are you like Malaysian, Filipino? She's trying to give me Brazilian. She says, people are things like that. What are you? And I couldn't answer, and I put my head down on the desk.
And then years later, you decide to explore who are you in a very large way, and that's to find out your heritage, and which is extraordinary. And I wanted a family tree in this book. I was trying to follow all the different people who are part of you, and maybe just describe, if you can, the heritage as you lay it out in your book.
Well, I have heritage that is African, Indian, Amerindian, so indigenous people of South America, Scottish, English, French, Chinese. My grandmother was Chinese, and Portuguese, and possibly Jewish.
And your grandmother, your Chinese grandmother, was such an important person in your life, wasn't she?
Very much. So my parents worked while we were kids, and my grandmother came with us from Guyana and looked after, you know, was sort of home all day raising us while my parents were at work.
We have, as you know, this Canadian sense of pride that we are a multiracial, multicultural society, that we're not like the United States. Your father, you described how when your family came to Canada, you discovered it in the 60s, how firmly grounded in whiteness that our society is. Do you still feel it's that way? You describe the Immigration Act in this book and what its implications. Do you feel that that Canada is still firmly grounded in that?
You know, I think that whiteness, is one of the issues that I get to in the book, is that whiteness is a state of mind. And so that whiteness is something, you know, my whole kind of main metaphor in the book is that I come from a plantation structure. That's how I exist, thanks to a plantation in British Guyana, and the history of indentured people in slavery, and people who were plantation owners and plantation workers. And you know, that hierarchy I equate as a kind of the equivalent of what currently still exists, which is you know, a system that perpetuates a certain way of understanding culture that is white. And therefore, but that doesn't mean that the only people who experience or who perpetuate that whiteness have white skin.
I think one of the striking things that you describe in the book is this encounter with that wonderful grandmother of yours with Chinese heritage, who is worried when she learns that you may be dating a black boy, a black man. And she basically said, we didn't come this far for you to do that. How did you feel at that moment?
Well, I was absolutely shocked and kind of affronted and hurt that someone so close to me would have those thoughts. But I understood them and understand them as a product of that plantation, because in the sugar plantation you have a hierarchy, in Guyana particularly, you have a hierarchy of power, which equates to skin color and ethnicity. So there are black enslaved people on the bottom rung, indentured people, Chinese indentured people, Portuguese, and and until you get to Scottish, British, white at the top. And so it's that structure that I understood she was relating to, so that, you know, and there's a kind of implied movement that you want to move up that ladder rather than back down it. And that's what I talk about in terms of that structure still existing. And
this plantation structure, it still exists?
Yeah, because I think that kind of state of mind that is a kind of neoliberal move towards having and extracting, and, you know, the people in power, that very small percentage of people across the world, it kind of emulates the small percentage of the owners of the plantation. At any given time in Guyana during the sugar plantation and during slavery, 3% of the population was white, but completely governed the area.
What do you think you learned about yourself in the course of writing this book?
I learned a lot about integration. I learned a lot about, I mean, one of the things the book comes to, as you mentioned, is it starts off with this "what are you" question, but it ends with a very different question, which is "who are you," rather than that kind of physical reliance on race being a biological construct, because we know that it's a construct, but it's also very real. It's also very real that a Black man in the street gets choked by a policeman whose knee is on his neck. So that is a very real element of race, even though race is a construct. And so we have to deal with both of those things simultaneously.
Well, Tessa, thank you very much, and we'll come back in the later discussion, but thanks for telling us about the book. I'm going to see, I think, Darrell Bricker. Are you there, Darrell?
I'm hitting cleanup. Here I am.
There you are. Hi, Darrell.
Nice to talk to you again, Carol.
Okay, just a brief introduction of you. Darrell Bricker is a pollster. He's an author, a media commentator, and an honorary colonel.
Yes, indeed. The Canadian Army.
Okay, and he is the CEO of Ipsos Public Affairs, regarded as the world's leading social and opinion researcher. He's co-authored several books, I guess with John Ibbotson mostly, right? Or is it all the books you've done before with John?
No, well, with a couple of other co-authors as well, Ed Greenspan, John Wright, some others. But the one we're going to talk about today is my first solo effort. So it's my solo album.
And just for people that the book they may know you best for, Empty Planet, The Shock of Population Decline. And this book, Next, Where to Live, What to Buy, and Who Will Lead Canada's Future. So welcome to you, Darrell.
Thanks, Carol.
One of the lines you give, which is really important, you say that there's this idea that diversity is what defines Canada. That's what people kind of, which we aspire to, or what we think we are. But you say tolerance is the core of what makes Canada work. What do you mean by that?
Well, one of the great things that I have in my career is an ability to do this type of research all over the world. And we don't see in Canada the same type of divisions on some of the questions, particularly related to racial background, that we see in other places, which has made it possible for our population to continue to grow during a time in which other populations are shrinking all over the world, mainly because of our ability to accept immigrants at a very high level. About 1% of our population, next to Australia, we're the country that accepts more immigrants than any others. And you know, we kind of throw out this idea of diversity as our strength. You know, actually diversity is our challenge, because we can't take it for granted. It is the source of so much turmoil that we've seen all over the world, particularly in places like Western Europe. It's fired a lot of the populist right-wing movements that we're seeing in the world right now, and we cannot take it for granted. So the point I make in my book is, yeah, it's a great story so far, but don't take it for granted. We've got a lot of work to do on this front. You
talk about a category you call perennials, and maybe you can just describe who they are and what effect they're having on our politics.
Well, we're obsessed with youth in our culture these days, and actually we have been since the end of the Second World War. But the truth is, there isn't as many of them as we think, and they don't have the spending power in particular, or political power, that we ascribe to them. In fact, the fastest growing part of our Canadian population is the oldest part of our population. So came up with the term perennials. That's actually not my term, but came up with the term perennials to describe these people who aren't going away. I mean, the largest share of our population growth right now comes from two sources. It comes from immigration, which has really been affected by this pandemic. And then the second thing is we're not dying as fast as we used to. So the average Canadian now lives to the age of 82. Back in the 1920s, the average Canadian lived to the age of 57. So the reason our population continues to grow is because we're not dying.
And what effect does that have on our nation's ability to evolve?
Well, our nation's evolving actually quite quickly, but not necessarily in the way that we recognize. So when you look at the evolution of the country, there's a lot of multicultural evolution, obviously, but we're also seeing the decline It's interesting that the Catherine was on Fogo Island, and the absolute desolate situation that we have in places that are more remote in this country, where young people are leaving. All that's basically left are older people in those places, and the dynamism actually in the country is not in our downtowns. It's actually in our suburbs. 90% of the population growth in Canada over the last 20 years has been in car commuting communities, mostly around our major cities. 90%.
You talk a lot in the book about the growth of the West, and that you feel that we can't, you ignore the West, you abandon it at your peril if you're in politics. And but is it, and you talk about the economy and how important it is, but is it not based on an industry that's essentially dying?
Well, one would think that, but if you actually take a look at the stats, and that's one of the things that I do constantly, is just look at the data. I mean, we can all have opinions, but the numbers tell the truth. So if you look at every month in the province of Alberta over the space of the last 5 years, every single month, the population has continued to expand, mostly as a result of external immigration. Not people coming from other parts of the country, but people coming from other countries to Canada. And it's because of our immigration patterns that we're seeing this. In fact, the population growth of Ontario, Quebec, and anything east of that is actually below the national average at this moment. It's still growing more rapidly in places like Alberta.
And yet you say that our politics, the direction it's going, is still very much dominated by what's called the Laurentian elite.
Yeah, so another book I read a lot of books. I wrote another book called The Big Shift that you may be aware of. And it was a #1 bestseller here in Canada. And basically what we said is there's new ways to win elections now. The old way that you used to win elections in Canada is you put Ontario, Quebec together, and that was enough. But since 2011, there are now more people who live west of the Ontario-Quebec border than there are people who live east of the Ontario-Quebec border. And Stephen Harper was able to win a national majority in that election in 2011 by putting together Western Canada and basically the suburbs of Toronto. So the biggest swing population in Canadian politics right now are those suburbs. There's about 70 seats, depending on how you want to count the greater Toronto area in the GTA right now. There's only 78 in the province of Quebec. Stephen Harper only won 5 seats in Quebec when he won his fairly significant majority in 2011. Justin Trudeau won his election because he won in the 905. Rob Ford won his election because he won in the 905. So particularly when you look at national politics, it's putting that group of the population together with Western Canadians if you're a conservative, but it's still the old way of winning if you're a liberal, which is Quebec and Ontario, but disproportionately in the 905. You've got to win it.
I'm wondering about the kind of mindset of Laurentian elites. It's not just the numbers, you're talking about the population distribution, but is the actual mindset of government of Ottawa still stuck in that place where the population or the country has really moved on to something else?
Yeah, it really has. And it's an incredibly hard thing for the Laurentian elite to accept. The country that they think that they're part of, they think that they govern, they think that they understand, is no longer that country. And the reason I say that is because how many of them actually live in the suburbs? How many of them actually live in Surrey? How many of them actually live in Milton or Markham, or the places that are growing most rapidly in this country and are now deciding virtually everything when it comes to everything from consumer taste through to what you're going to see in your grocery stores, through to what's going to happen in our next election campaign. I mean, they may drive through it onto their, on their way to their cottage in the Muskokas, but they certainly don't understand that, and they don't know anybody who lives there. And as a result, what happens is we have these navel-gazing exercises about what Canadians think that actually don't really apply to what Canadians think. So the purpose of this book next is to say, look, you think you understand the country, you don't. It's changed in some incredibly dramatic ways. They're going to have big impacts on everything from politics to what consumers are going to see in stores, through to where the population is going to be growing, what's going to happen in real estate, everything that you can think of. And you really need to get on top of these trends if you're going to be part of what the new Canada is going to be.
Before we go into a larger discussion, I want to ask you, is one thing you say that just sort of kind of an aside almost, but it's really stood out for me. You said that something is going horribly wrong in the lives of Canadian men. And you said we should all be worried about Canadian men. I would think that for a lot of people, Canadian men are not, especially white men, are not high on the list of things to worry about. Why do you think that's the case?
Because of our complete myopia and our ignoring basic population statistics. So in the 1970s, Canada had more men in it than women. Today, there are more women than men. There are more boys born in every country in the world, except if there's artificial intervention in the birth process, than there are women in every country. In Canada, that's absolutely the case. By the age of 30, that difference is completely eliminated. And every year after that, there are more girls than boys in the population until you get past, say, 65, where it's like 45, 55. And the reason for that is there is catastrophic death early death among men. So of the 20 reasons that anybody can die that the World Health Organization tracks, 16 of them are more prevalent among men. 3 of the other reasons that they can have are completely related to female biology. The one in which women are more prominent than men, in which both women and men can basically have, it's Alzheimer's disease.
But what does that say, though? What does that, I mean, those are numbers, but what does it say to you that has you concerned about why we should all be worried?
Because very few people, what I just told you, almost everybody who's on this call, unless you look at this, you didn't know. No. So the male suicide rates in Canada are 3 times higher than they are for women. Any accidental deaths, way more likely for men than they are for women. Death from violence, although violence against women is a horrible thing, way more likely for men than for women.
And why do you think that's the case?
Because men do a lot of stupid things. Men don't listen to their doctors. Men don't visit their doctors. There's no real movement in this in this country for men's health. There's no clinics really for men's health, maybe for prostate cancer, but that's only one thing. But 16 of the 20 reasons that you can die prematurely in this world are more prevalent among men than women. And I talk about this in the book, what we're going to see, and we've already seen in Canada, is an increasing feminization of every aspect of Canada. As women continue to empower, as they have more and more independent economic power, as they're more part of the decision-making structure that's going to take place in Canada, a lot of it is going to be driven by the fact that there's just more and more and more of them every year. Mm-hmm. And so we are becoming a much more female country, and we already are.
I think we'll come back to some of those ideas. Darrell, and we'll just sum up your part of this and move on to a larger discussion. The metaphysical part of the program has now arrived. We perhaps agree on some of the facts, but there's obviously lots of differences of opinion. I'm wondering how we can talk about how government can open up more space to benefit more people. I think that's what, if there's some common ground here, that this is a society that is benefiting still, and perhaps returning once again to benefiting a smaller and smaller slice of our population. So I'll start with you, Jeff. If you could just speak of this, what you've described in your book as this growing income inequality. You mentioned it in your introductory remarks.
Right. Well, as trade liberalization has exposed more and more of the expendables to competing with wages that are 1/10 of what they get paid and have thrown them out of the middle class. Ironically, at the same time, the social safety net has shrunk. In theory, the gains from GDP, from free trade, should make everybody better off. Not that there wouldn't be losers, but you could redistribute the income from the winners to the losers so no one would be worse off. When I did a study for Chez looking at how have Canadian households done, 80% of Canadian households have seen no real income gains for the last 30 years. But what everybody sort of knows that. What I found surprising was that the top 1% did even better on an after-tax basis than on a pre-tax basis. And you might go, how can that possibly be? Aren't rich people taxed heavier than poor people? That's on wage income. Rich people don't make their riches from wages. They make it from capital gains. They make it from dividends. They make it from inheritance taxes. So while governments like the Trudeau regime or the Obama regime will say that they're redistributing income, in fact, it's the opposite, that the plutocrats, the top 1%, have even done better on an after-tax basis than a pre-tax basis. And that's not going to change until we tax capital gains the same way we tax wages. That's not going to change until billionaires get taxed on the dynastic wealth that they leave in inheritance to their children, as opposed to no inheritance tax, of which incidentally, progressive Canada is the only G7 country that doesn't have one. I realize that's to the benefit of people like Trudeau and Morneau, and I'm sure that they intend their kids to inherit on the same basis that they have, but it really exposes the fallacy of governments in any way redistributing income in any meaningful way.
Catherine, I wanted to address you with the issue of growth and opportunities and employment opportunities that we're seeking. We want to expand manufacturing. We want to expand our what we have, how we live. But at the same time, we know that the concern of growth is that there's more greenhouse gases. And so, how can we make that shift and not leave people behind?
I'm not an economist. I'm a storyteller, but as a storyteller, I believe very strongly that we need new stories. I think Jeff said we need to change the narrative, and I believe profoundly we need to change the narrative, even though we may want different narratives. And I don't believe that we can go on either with the narrative or the actuality of endless economic growth on a fragile planet with limited resources. And so, I really fundamentally think we have to rethink our politics and our cultural stories. And I would argue for a politics of care, a politics of care that includes the natural world, that includes the climate, like a profound climate care, that we abandon narratives of individual success and human exceptionalism. They're outmoded. They're not going to help us survive in some fundamental way as a species. And we really need to start thinking in a profoundly long-term way across generations, many generations into the future, in order to I consider our survival. Wealth is not going to do any of us any good if we're dead or living on a dead planet.
And Tessa, I just want to ask you, because we're talking about how capitalism, globalization leaves people behind, but racism is leaving people behind, isn't it? I think maybe economists talk in terms of what economies do to people and how they shrink the space for their growth and their development. But racism is at least as large a scourge, is it not?
Well, absolutely, and they're completely connected. Racialized capitalism has been going on since this slave trade. You have to, it is an extension of that, in that some people need to have less, some people need to be dehumanized, some people are left behind, as Jeff's saying. I think that one of the things I really agree with what Jeff said is that that idea of redistribution, he said those words, and that's a hugely important thing, but it's also, I think, to understand the people who have been left behind also have there's a race class correlation that we can't ignore, and I think that comes from the history of North America, and how it was settled, how it was conquered, and how it was settled in the States through slavery, and slavery also existed in Canada. So to remember that those structures and the settlement of Europeans on indigenous land is a violence that remains economically embedded in how we function. So when those things need to be addressed together.
Darrell, in your view, how do we open the space for more people to benefit?
Well, I think, when it comes to politics in this country, I think that we really do have to listen to the public. A lot of what we're talking about here, would probably go over the head of most of the people who are living day to day in this country, and there's a need, I think, to get down and familiar with who the people are in this country and what this country is today. and ultimately understanding that democracy is not just the process that we go through every 4 years, say for example in a majority situation, but the listening part of that, the responding to what the public's looking for, is an incredibly important part of it. And it really does cover off a lot of what we're talking about here. So one of the biggest issues I have with leadership in this country today is the degree to which they talk over the heads of average people. If you want to understand why somebody like a Doug Ford, who was a complete write-off a year ago, is able to connect with the Canadian population, or at least the people in Ontario, is because he actually knows how to talk to real people. Instead, what we have in Ottawa with this cuckoo clock, activity by the Prime Minister of Canada every day, in which he basically talks over the heads of people, doesn't really interact with them in terms of the lives that they're living today, and really connect with them. That's the political problem that we're really facing. There's a lack of authenticity in terms of our political communication today. It's all kind of a form of play acting, as we look at these things as being simply the performance art of campaigns. I love this in political debate these days, where we evaluate things like political debates based on the speechifying of people. There's really no correlation between that and how they actually perform when they govern. We're almost like hiring actors these days. So what I'd like to see in politics is more of an interaction with what's actually happening on the street, more authentic types of political leadership, and real listening, because I don't think we're doing a good job of that today.
Is listening to the public, Darrell, is that the same thing as populism in your view?
Well, I think populism, we've always had versions of it. I mean, anybody who's familiar enough with Canadian history knows that most of the big changes that we've had in terms of Canadian politics have basically been driven by populist movements, whether it's the United Farmers of Alberta, the Winnipeg General Strike. We've had them from both the left and the right in this country. I mean, we had the Union Nationale in the province of Quebec, which was basically a populist movement too. So you either understand the forces that drive populism and you try to channel them in a positive direction, or you suffer the wrath. And what we saw in the United States was and I agree with Jeff on this, the political elites of both parties talking over the head of the population, having the electoral process taken away from them by somebody, whether you like them or not, who has a superpower. And that superpower is to be able to connect with a base vote that's big enough in the United States to actually be able to swing elections. So you can evaluate him on an objective basis in terms of the effect that he's had, but what's undeniable is his ability to actually connect with the public. I absolutely do not believe that he's an authentic voice, so I'll take that away from him. But that ability to actually be able to communicate with the public is something that is a very powerful force in the world today.
Tessa, back to you. This idea of populism, this idea that there is the will of the people, and that populists are representing that there are pure people versus a corrupt elite, and that this is something that is the essence, I think, of what populism is. Do you think that it's benefiting minorities? I mean, we talk about the law of the majority, but is it not the protection of minorities?
Well, there are a lot of minorities who are populists as well. I mean, I think the idea that people of color or Black people are not Trump supporters or not populists is not true. Or so I think that one of the ways that I look at this issue is not about general sort of national politics, but in who actually is getting left behind, and that what are those people doing about it. And I think that small group grassroots movements are the key to real change. I don't think that the way that politics runs in Canada or in the United States actually affects change in the way that people who are voted out, who are left out, are really wanting it. And I think that I don't think populism is the same as a grassroots movement, collective movement of people who want a particular thing, whether it be to climate, to stop the climate crisis, or whether it be anti-poverty movements or Black Lives movements. Those are effective.
It was interesting. The other day I was interviewing a man in the United States, in Pennsylvania, a Black man, about what he thought of Donald Trump and how he was going to vote. and Jeff will like this, is that what I thought he would tell me is why he is supporting Joe Biden, and he didn't, and I have to actually do a mental adjustment, because of course I had gone into the interview presuming that that was where we were going, and it wasn't. And what he was saying, it was so clear, is that he didn't feel that either Joe Biden or Donald Trump was going to deliver for him, that the feeling of being left behind so many times as a man in a poor Black community was just so profound that he felt that, as the old phrase is, all politics is local, all change is local, and that these large figures, these large movements are not representational of what people need. Tessa.
I would absolutely agree with that. But then there's the kind of myth that change happens through that structural change rather happens with the change of the man at the top. And I think that's what, that kind of fantasy that we live on every time there's an election, but actually things don't change, because the structures that govern us aren't necessarily political. They are economic and global.
Catherine, I just wanted to bring you into this because I guess is a feeling that we're having is that there's seismic changes are going on, and people wake up feeling anxious or wondering what today is going to bring for so many reasons now. I just wonder, I'm sure you probably share that, but do you feel anything that what we're watching is it's changing and this upheaval, that it's going in something, that these big changes are going to lead to something that actually opens a space, that actually improves our lives, that actually takes us someplace which is a better world for us?
Yeah, I think that, it's interesting listening to this conversation, because part of me keeps going, we're still so concentrated on the short term. And I do think we have a historical vision, but it's so important that we think with our political decisions forward in time. I mean, we're colonists of the future, and we need to think multiple generations ahead when we're thinking about any political decision. But I've also been thinking very much, when I think about politics of care, about the fundamentals of caring for the air. And when I think about things that bring together the pandemic and Black Lives Matter and the wildfires in California, it's this, and interestingly, it's a phrase that comes out in Tessa's book in an uncanny way: I can't breathe. And fundamentally, we all need to be able to breathe. I mean, that is what will keep us alive in the most fundamental way. And that is where our care has to take us back. And it has to take us back in terms of social justice, in terms of Black Lives Matter, in terms of our pandemic response, in terms of our climate response. We need air and atmosphere.
Somebody sent me some photos very early this morning that were photos from Lesbos, the refugee camp in Greece that burned down last week. And the people who are they're sleeping on the road, they're just trying to figure out what to do. And the images are as shocking as they always are when we see what's happening with people whose lives have been turned upside down and they're trying to get someplace else. There can be no question that because of climate change, because of what we're seeing happening, that people increasingly are going to be on the move, that there are serious food shortages that we have to anticipate. I'm not talking about North America or Canada, maybe some parts of the United States, we're talking about globally. And I just wonder, Catherine, starting with you, how do you think societies are going to deal with the upheaval we're going to see from so many people who are going to have to flee where they live?
Well, I'm sure on some level there will be resistance, but my hopeful side says that if we change our narratives, if we concentrate on a politics of radical care, of relationship, if we foreground relationship over growth and economic growth, and if we broaden our networks of relationship, beyond national borders are not going to save us in the larger scale. So that's where I place my hope, both in youth and the agency of youth, which we haven't really had a chance to talk about here, but I think is really also fundamentally important, and a politics of relationship.
Tessa, do you want to join in that? Because
Sorry, yeah, I really do. I really appreciate Catherine's emphasis on care, because one of the things that I do in my book, as you mentioned, I go from what are you, the question what are you, to who are you in the end. That through this long process of self-examination as to where I'm complicit in the plantation structure. Having gained access to the plantation house versus the field, who am I in that structure? And so that question of who am I has to be asked on an individual level by all of us. So who are you in the face of migrants drowning, migrants in a camp burning? Who are you in the face of anti-Black racism? Who are you in the face of the planet burning? So all of those questions have to be broadened to a societal, small politics as well as big politics way to decide, instead of this based on the idea of growth, to decide who we are as a society.
I've just been given a 5-minute warning, so we have to have a wrap-up question. But I'll pose a question to Darrell and Jeff and the others, that you can answer this, or you can answer what the question I just had posed to Tess and Catherine. And I'm just wondering, my last question is there any reason in the midst of all this for optimism? And I'll go to you first, Darrell.
Tons. So we tend to get carried away with some of these issues, and this is a great example. There's going to be a huge amount of climate change migration. Not so far. In fact, the UN isn't even plotting anybody on the map right now as being a climate change refugee. This is something that's very speculative. Only 3% of the world's population today, and we need to know these facts, 3% of the world's population today doesn't live in the country in which it was born. Only 1% of the entire world population are actually refugees. So this is a problem that is manageable. We can deal with it. We can focus on what the problem is because it's not overwhelming. And on the issue of climate change, that one of the biggest issues that I have with a lot of the conversation about climate change is this idea that the world population is going to continue to grow ad infinitum. No, it is not. It is going to peak at about 2050, 2040, and it's going to start to decline. And it's probably going to decline to about what it is today, if not smaller. So there's a lot of things that are going to be happening just based on the decisions that people are making about what the structure of their family is going to be, what reproduction is going to be, and what's actually happening in reality, not in our imaginations, in reality, on the ground with people today, that suggests a fair amount of optimism about what the future is. This is not going to be a dystopic world based on the individual decisions that people are making, because individuals are actually making a lot of the right decisions.
Thank you. Catherine.
Oh, I just want to make space for the youth of today and tomorrow. And one of the things in my novel is it is narrated by the younger characters. And I really did want to turn that lens within myself on a younger perspective, and both how they're looking at the world today and how they think about the future. And we have examples nationally. We have Indigenous youth leaders. We have Greta Thunberg. We have the youth climate movement and the Friday school strikes. And I take a lot of optimism from the agencies of our youth.
And Tessa, if you want to add, I know you already talked a bit about your thoughts for the future, but reasons for optimism.
Well, I don't know about optimism, because I think hope and optimism are completely different, two different things. I don't necessarily have optimism about where we're going, certainly around the climate crisis, and around the division between the extremely rich and the extremely poor and the people who are showing up in refugee camps. But I do have hope, both for, as Catherine said, around young people, but also I think hope is not a guarantee. And one of my friends, the late John Berger, he said, hope is an energy. And it's not a guarantee. It's an energy that sometimes is at its greatest during the darkest of times. So that's what I'm trying to hold on to.
I have to say that one of the things reading your book that we share this this tremendous affection for John Berger. But you actually knew him. You actually were. I'm so envious of that. He's had a huge effect on my life. I would go to Jeff at this point, though. I'm told that Jeff has left our discussion, and so we won't have the benefit of his wisdom for these closing remarks. And Jeff, unless you've returned from wherever, I was thinking maybe if we waited long enough, he'd come back, but he hasn't. So I will say in absentia, thank you, Jeff, and Tessa McWatt, Catherine Bush, Darrell Bricker. It's been really great talking to all of you. Thank you so much.
Thanks all.
Carol.
Yes,
Thanks,
thank
everybody.
you.
Nice meeting you all. Thank you.
Yes, likewise.
So just once again, thank you to Carol, Darrell, Catherine, Tessa, and Jeff for this very wide-ranging and fascinating conversation. A reminder that all of their books are available for sale at Novel Idea in store for pickup or order online. A thank you to Novel Idea, and thanks to you for joining us and for supporting Kingston WritersFest. Please join us Sunday for more great events, and good night.